Good evening and welcome to the 32nd webinar from the Foreign Correspondents Club of South Asia in New Delhi. My name is Manish Gupta. I am the president of FCC South Asia, and I'd like to welcome all our guests and my fellow moderators, panelists today to this very important webinar. As we all understand, India is going through a catastrophic crisis of COVID-19, and this is a very important subject on how India has finally gone out to its friends and countries and people and corporations across the world to seek cooperation and support in fighting the pandemic, and how the world has actually come up in great solidarity with India. We are very happy to conduct these webinars every now and then. Right now, we have started again since the lockdowns came back to Delhi and India since last week. So this is the second webinar last Tuesday and this Tuesday, and hopefully with my friends and colleagues, we will continue this series of webinars at least every Tuesday, if not more frequently. I'd like to thank everybody here who's joined me. Let me introduce my team here, my panelists. Sebastian Farsis, who's the secretary of the Foreign Correspondents Club of South Asia, also from the French media, and Emily Schmall, who is a correspondent for the New York Times, and she's part of the managing committee or the governing committee of the Foreign Correspondents Club of South Asia. Emily and Sebastian will moderate and co-moderate this panel today. I thank the guests again, but I'll move over to now Sebastian to please take over and introduce the panel, the subject, together with Emily. Thank you.
So thank you very much thank you, Munish, and thank you everyone for being with us. We've decided this week to tackle the dramatic change that we're seeing, of course, following this not so much like these dramatic events with the second wave, and how it has implication on the geopolitical scene following India's call for help to foreign nations. We've seen that, of course, a few months ago, India was delivering millions of vaccines to foreign nations. Today, the country, following this pandemic, has to call for help, and this help has been received. This call has been received. The help is now overwhelming by more than 40 countries that have actually accepted and started delivering this. So with us, we have three guests. Emmanuel LENAIN, ambassador of France to India, one of the first countries that have actually responded and started delivering help to India. Shubhajit
Nice
Roy,
to be here tonight.
Welcome, Ambassador, from the embassy. Shubhajit Roy, which is journalist and associate editor of the Indian Express covering foreign affairs. Good evening, Shubhajit.
Thank you, Sebastian.
And Manoj Joshi, Dr. Manoj Joshi, distinguished fellow from the Observer Research Foundation. Good evening. So the Ministry of External Affairs was supposed to join us. They had to cancel at the last minute because they're also very busy with the India-UK summit right now. But we'll start with understanding what was that dramatic change that happened a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, when India actually called for foreign nations to help, and that is actually quite a change, because last year in similar situation, India didn't have to do so, actually resorted to something which was more of a self-reliance policy, Atmanirbhar policy. Today, we are dealing with a crisis that forces the country to request for help. So, Emily, we'll see with you actually what has been the priorities set by the Ministry of External Affairs in trying to find this help abroad.
Yes, thanks, Sebastian, and thanks again to all of our esteemed panelists and to the FCC president. So, as you said, Sebastian, the last few weeks, there's been a flurry of activity. The Minister of External Affairs, Mr. Jaishankar, has spoken to his counterparts in probably about a dozen countries across the world, if not more, to facilitate assistance to India. And it's started to arrive. Sebastian, as you pointed out, France, the UK, the US were among the first to have aid delivered. And the focus that the government has put on this aid is oxygen, which we know has become a critical problem in this second wave. Dozens of people in the capital, New Delhi alone, have died due to a shortage in oxygen. And we know that it's not purely because of lack of supplies, but it seems to also be a logistical problem, a distribution problem. There's a lot of squabbling between the central government and the government of Delhi, for example. So it's not clear yet how this assistance of oxygen and oxygen making plants is going to resolve the larger logistical and organizational problems. But in any case, just yesterday, the Foreign Secretary Harsh Vardhan gave a press briefing in which he described the priorities as being liquid oxygen, equipment that makes oxygen, and then urgent therapeutic products like remdesivir, and then there's another drug called, and I'm sure I'm going to screw up the name or the pronunciation, but it's tocilizumab, which we know are not proven to stop COVID, but seem to have some therapeutic benefit. And there's been a huge black market created in the shortage of these therapeutics. And he also described, the Ministry of External Affairs and the Indian government at large putting out a call to its foreign missions, asking them for help in getting priority items brought to India as quickly as possible. And at the same time, as Sebastian mentioned, a number of corporations in the US, many of which are headed by Indian Americans, and corporations elsewhere have pledged assistance. So it remains to be seen how all of this will impact the wave that we're experiencing here. But I think everyone is very hopeful that soon, at the very least, this tragedy of people suffocating because of a lack of oxygen in hospitals that story will come to an end. So without further ado, Sebastian, if you want to pose our first question to our panelists.
Yeah, and the first question would be, I think to the Ambassador LENAIN, which are representing France, which has been one of the first countries to answer that call for aid, and that in an important manner. So Ambassador, like to talk, before talking of the logistics, which is one aspect, very important, just the call itself, when did you receive that request, how that request is actually sent to a country like France, and how do you identify when you're in France or through your liaison, how do you identify quickly which equipment can be sent by France to help India?
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be tonight with such distinguished journalists and with a scholar like Professor Joshi, who knows very well France and Europe. And I must say that we always read with great interest his papers. Did we receive a call? Actually, that's not exactly how it works. I think it's just a two-way street, two-way solidarity. You said at the beginning that India declined some offer for assistance last year. I wouldn't say that. I mean, the situation was less severe, but at that time we provided assistance to India already by sending in July of last year some ventilators, and which were very much needed. But more important, and India has been really helpful to us, and at that time providing some very much needed medical drugs to French hospitals at spring last year. And that's something that French people didn't forget, and they wanted to reciprocate. So we didn't get a real call by the Indian authorities, but that was a clear willingness from part of the French people and from our president, actually, President Macron, about 10 days ago. that we build a package to support India. And as you very aptly said, I mean, oxygen is the core of the problem right now in India. But and as you also mentioned, it's not a matter of it's less a matter of global quantity of oxygen available than of actual delivery. So the idea, what we wanted to achieve, is to have a fast and direct impact by providing capacity to hospitals and to do it in a matter of days, so that we can start saving lives. You also seem to oppose self-resilient India, Atmar Bharat, and assistance. Again, not totally agree with that. What we're doing with this package of assistance is not only providing short-term relief and oxygen, but also with building capacity in India for the health system. When we provide these oxygen generators to hospitals, I mean, they not only provide oxygen for a few days, I mean, they provide oxygen for roughly 12 or more years, and without having to purchase oxygen from suppliers, but they produce their own oxygen by purifying and compressing the air around and providing oxygen to these hospitals. So it's not real assistance, it's capacity building what we're doing.
Emily?
Right. Thank you so much, Ambassador. And thank you for elaborating that the assistance that the French government is providing is capacity building rather than simply supplies. So the second question is for Dr. Joshi. I'm curious, Dr. Joshi, how do you interpret such a change of position when simply just a few weeks ago and for much of the past year, the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been calling and lauding India for its ability to be self-reliant. And that seems to have been the pattern for several decades, several administrations in India. Now it is faced with the reality that it must rely on some aid and some assistance from abroad. So how do you interpret that change? Dr. Joshi, your mic is muted. Please unmute.
Thank you. If you can see the kind of tsunami that has hit India, then you can understand the position of the government. My own view is that through this whole COVID pandemic, there has been an acute shortage of global cooperation. I mean, right from the beginning, it was virtually every country for itself. And it's only after some time that this climate of cooperation has come back. And I'm glad that has happened, because it's not possible to deal with this kind of a calamity on your own. And I'm glad that India has realized this. There is a kind of a tendency to take a kind of I would almost say hubristic stand and say that, we can manage, we are competent, but actually what has emerged is that we have not been able to manage. We have not been able to manage, and there are so many difficulties. It's only when a crisis has hit the country do we realize, because, if you look at the COVID thing, you don't find too many countries where this oxygen business has happened, at least as far as I can recollect. It's India, which of course has a huge population, has a huge demand, and when things go wrong, they go wrong in a big way. And they have done that, and you can see even just today, the newspaper has 24 people killed in Karnataka because they could not get oxygen. I mean, so that's an extremely great tragedy that has happened. COVID has brought many tragedies, but this shortage of oxygen, people dying of lack of oxygen in the hospital bed is something which is very difficult to cope with. And I'm glad that France has been helped. I was just recollecting that it was a Frenchman who actually discovered this oxygen, Lavoisier, and how to produce it. And I'm glad that centuries later, we have France assisting us in capacity building. All I can say is that no matter what the government of India tells you, India lacks the capacity. We need to build our capacity. We need to build the logistical system. Even now, citizens of this very town where we live are running around on their own without any direction, without any help from anyone in authority.
Thank you, Dr. Joshi. I mean, it's quite interesting to have this reminder about the ground reality also. Now we'll move to Shubhajit Roy. You handle foreign affairs for the Indian Express. What we see is actually a positive, quite an overwhelming response by foreign nations. Around 40, according to the MEA, have responding positively and sending or planning to send aid to India. How do you see that positive reaction, very quick reaction? Do you see that India has been, in a way, rewarded for also helping other countries last year? How do you see the reaction from the diplomatic world?
Yeah, thank you, Sebastian, for that question. And thank you for inviting me for this panel discussion. Just to kind of set the context of this assistance that India needs right now, is that till December 2004, India used to accept aid assistance from foreign governments quite regularly, and that was sought for, that was needed as and when India needed it. It reached out to the world, and it had happened during earthquakes, floods, and all. But in December 2004, when tsunami hit India's southern coast, Tamil Nadu, and as well as Andaman Nicobar Islands, the policy of that the government of that time changed its policy and said that India is self-sufficient enough, it is self-reliant enough to tackle the crisis on its own. It has its domestic resources, it has the capacity to deal with such crisis. So therefore, the then government under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh decided not to accept aid from foreign governments. However, foreign nationals and charitable organizations were welcome to donate or give aid. Now, for 16 years, mind you, this particular policy has been held. India refused aid or did not reach out to the world for aid in the last 16 years, be it an earthquake, be it a flood. But this time, because the pandemic has literally crippled the healthcare system and people are left to their own, as we know right now, as Manoj pointed it out earlier, that people are actually on their own, be it on oxygen supply, be it on hospital beds, be it with medicines which are essential, unproven but essential and recommended by doctors. So when there is this kind of a shortage and a crisis, India was left with no option. The government was left with no other alternative but to reach out to other governments. Now, what happened was, if you talk to the government officials, they would say that we have not changed the policy. What they have been maintaining is that because India offered assistance earlier, because India provided assistance last year by providing hydroxychloroquine, masks, and other supplies during the early first wave of the pandemic, now the world is assisting us. So we help the world is helping us now. So that is the sort of approach. And the other issue that they have been flagging is Indian government wants to procure these items, but if some government wants to donate it out of free will, we accept it with gratitude. So this has been the nuanced position, but a significant shift from the past 16 years that took place. So that is how you need to see the context. It's not just because the governments were sort of, because India was generous and was playing good Samaritan last year, all of last year, that the world is coming out. India is actually in shortage of beds and is changing its policy by procuring from different countries, including from China. That is something you have to also remember, because we are in a 1 year long, in fact, today marks a year from since the border standoff with China. The 5th of May last year was when the border standoff began. So in that context, this is a significant shift that Indian government has taken in its approach when it is seeking assistance from the world.
Thank you, Shubhajit. That was, yes, thank you for noting. 1 year since the beginning of this border standoff with China, and India is receiving assistance from China, and it's also been offered from Pakistan. I'm not sure if they've accepted from them yet. So next question is for the ambassador. Ambassador, would you mind please just clarifying precisely what France has donated to India? And if you could please describe whatever logistical obstacles you are encountering, you are overcoming to bring particularly the oxygen capacity that you mentioned. I think I've read also that there are plans to bring some liquid oxygen by boat.
Oh, okay. Now we are going to be technical. What are we bringing? That's the first batch of assistance, and we've been building it in 10 days, less than 10 days actually. So it's a plane that arrived, special plane on Sunday, and carrying 28 tons of equipment. The core of it, it's 8 large world-class oxygen generator plants, which are built by a French very innovative company called Novair, and each of them can provide oxygen for a 250-bed hospital. So you don't need any more oxygen supply. It's really process the oxygen. In addition to that, in the plane, there were also some other equipment. There were 28 ventilators of very good technology, and also small equipment which is really needed, which is electronic syringe pushers. It's very useful. How did we build the logistics? I mean, the idea was we were going to have it in place as soon as possible and within maximum 3 days. So we built up with the support of the Indian government, with the Indian Red Cross, with the Ministry of Health, with the MEA, obviously. We start working in advance with the hospitals, which get the equipment, to make sure that they had the proper capacities, they could plug it, use it, that they had technician on site where it would come, and they would be immediately get it. And that's been done. The first equipment was put in service as early as Monday, and right now we have 6 out of the 8 producing oxygen and saving lives, actually, and the last 2 will be operational as tomorrow morning. So it's quite a challenge, and I must say it's big work, but we're very proud of it. I mean, all the staff at the embassy has turned into fundraisers, because the most of the money comes from the donation of French companies. They turn into logisticians, they turn into specialists of oxygen technologies, and it's quite a nice team achievement, and we're very proud to give that back to India.
And the second phase would be with the boats carrying oxygen to India?
Actually, there will be more than that in terms of phases. We're going to have a second batch of equipment coming at the end of the month. because the companies have been very generous with their donations. So we're going to bring some new equipment by the end of the month, and also there's, as you refer to containers, we're building some sort of oxygen bridge between the oxygen production sites of a French company called Air Liquide in the region, mostly in Doha and Abu Dhabi, and with the support of the Indian forces, bringing these containers to Mumbai, where they can be unloaded and distributed to hospitals. And that's a great operation in terms of logistics. These are, if you want to enter into details, these are 20-feet containers, and in a matter of few weeks, we should bring some roughly 600 tons of oxygen, which means we would provide with this oxygen for more than 30,000 patients for a day. It's quite a large capacity. So, as mentioned, our effort is twofold. I mean, we provide liquid oxygen in large capacity for immediate need, and we build long-term capacity with equipment that produce their own oxygen, and with this, the hospitals become fully autonomous. And there might be more to come, but that's what I can announce today.
Ambassador.
Excellency and Manoj and Shubhajit, I just have a question after the first round. You know, these are compelling circumstances that can force countries to change policies, as was mentioned earlier. But I think they are also, you know, these circumstances bring about changes in paradigms and evolve a new order, such as the one that COVID has. In which India helps as a pharma capital, but countries with actual healthcare infrastructure come back and establish, like you said, build capacity to generate oxygen tomorrow, build probably other devices. So do you see that happening? Do you think COVID-19 has finally shaken the world? I heard Emily mention that also, where now countries are actually thinking of not hesitating, not shying away from saying, I need this, can you do that? Collaborating in science and technology, research and development, and helping out each other, because you never know what calamity befalls who in what sort of shape. So I'll start with Excellency and then maybe Manoj and Shubhajit.
Well, I hope so. I hope you're right. I mean, because to defeat the pandemic, we must defeat everywhere. I mean, there's no border, there's no pandemic. The virus goes just can spread. So we will have to be very collective. Do I think that there's a clear change? I mean, I would say the first months of the pandemic was rather a pessimistic side, I must say. What we've seen so-called vaccine diplomacy of certain countries. That we've seen very nationalistic pushers. We've seen a very selfish attitude. We've seen countries stealing from each other equipment on the airline strips, stealing some test kits, stealing some vaccines. We've seen some very, at a time where more international cooperation was needed, we've seen some very selfish moves by certain countries. We've seen countries not retreating from multilateral organization at the time where there was a clear need. I must say that the last few months bring more optimism, I must say. We've seen more cooperation, we've seen more willingness to help each other, and today India is the battleground for common effort, but tomorrow it will be somewhere else. I mean, there will be other regions. We've seen that these pandemic is moving very fast with new variants emerging, and we may in some time have to help more and collectively another region of the world. And India, again, with its great capacity, with its production capacity, with its great industry, will have a role also to play. So in short, to answer your question, pessimism at the beginning of the crisis, and in the last few weeks, few months, more optimism.
Thank you. Dr. Joshi?
Yeah. Well, I think, broadly, I agree with the ambassador that we didn't start off too well, and there was very little cooperation. There were all kinds of things happening. People were extreme kind of nationalism. Even in the European Union, which is supposed to be a political union, there were problems. But I think definitely lessons will be learned or should be learned. And some of the lessons are that maybe things like this pandemics, public health issues need to be also incorporated into our concepts of national security. In the sense, every country must have certain redundant capability or capacity of a certain types of medical equipment and drugs, meaning we simply cannot have a situation where the whole supply chain goes all the way from France all the way, let's say, to China, or from India to China. So there are certain areas where we need to develop in-house capacity, or let's say shorter supply chains, meaning you need, instead of having some huge kind of industrial setup, we need more redundancy built into the system. And of course, as far as India is concerned, we have learned, or we ought to have learned the lesson that our capacity is extremely, extremely poor. Meaning we are a very poor country, and what we have been witnessing in cities like Delhi and Mumbai. Now you can imagine what is the situation in the countryside or in the smaller towns where you don't have that kind of system. We have to be humble before that and accept the fact that we do not even have a decent basic public health system. Meaning in India, for some reason, people went out straight away and said, we'll build these huge. So if you go to Gurgaon, you'll have this massive hospitals, Medanta, Fortis, Apollo, etc. But when you're talking of the man in the street, what happens? Meaning absolutely basics which are required. So I hope that there will be some humility in the system, because it's very easy to declare, as you did in 2004, that look, we can manage. We can't. And when you are faced with this pandemic, we are looking at this COVID today. There could be around the corner some more deadlier things than this COVID. It's just that having learned this lesson, we've got to build this. We have got to build our structures. It's like the 2008 financial crisis. Once that crisis has happened, then you learned that you shouldn't have banking mixed up with financing and that kind of stuff. So you needed to restructure. So likewise now, you do need to develop systems which are more decentralized. So whether you're talking of oxygen plants, they shouldn't be concentrated in one corner of the country, and so you have the logistical problem of trying to ship the oxygen across the country. So I think this kind of thinking needs to get into the mind after this particular experience.
Thank you, Dr. Joshi. And lastly, Shubhajit, what do you think? I mean, talking with your diplomatic sources from different parts of the world, does it seem that there's any hope of a more collaborative paradigm emerging in the second wave of the coronavirus?
Yeah, Emily, I mean, if there's one thing COVID as a pandemic has taught us, is that if either we all sink together or we all sail together. And the vaccine cooperation across the world has been possibly, development of vaccines was possibly one of the takeaways of this particular pandemic. The way on 3rd of January last year, China shared the genomic sequence with the entire world. And all the developers, all the vaccine developers, scientists across the world did unprecedented collaborative effort approach before they came up with more than half a dozen vaccine candidates, which are already in trials or clinical trials or post-clinical trials stage, and which are being vaccinated by people to the people. And apart from vaccine cooperation, of course, right now we are in a crisis. But in crisis is when people have to stick together, just as Dr. Anthony Fauci the other day told our paper that, India, US and the entire world is pulling for India, and they all have to come together in terms of building infrastructure, strengthening the capability, because it is beyond a single country or government's effort or sort of a capacity to tackle this pandemic. So that capacity development has to be immediate as well as intermediate and long term. And when we talk about vaccine initiative, I would also remind you there's this Quad summit that took place, which was a virtual one. And the Quad vaccine initiative is actually, again, a kind of a collaborative initiative where US American vaccines would be manufactured in India with Japanese funding and Australian logistics. So that, I think, these are models for us to follow. And 2021, I think, should show us that that kind of aggressive rollout of vaccine in India, across the world, is absolutely necessary, is utmost priority if we have to fight the pandemic.
Thank you. I'm going to pause on this optimistic note about a new international paradigm to solve global crises. Just to remind people that we are live on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Twitter, and on our website. And members are watching from all over South Asia, India, of course, and other parts of the world. And we invite your questions. So if you have questions for our esteemed panelists, please add them on Facebook, and we will take them up here. Please, Sebastian.
Yeah, talking about this desire, these needs of cooperation, one aspect that we're seeing is how the crisis of yesterday, of last year with China, for example, is changing a bit its parameters. So, Dr. Joshi, what do you see on this relationship between India and China, especially that India today is deeply affected economically as much as in its health system by this crisis, but China less. So how do you see this relationship, and how do you see China vis-a-vis India benefiting or not from this situation?
See, I think that it's very difficult to get away from China, meaning in the sense China is a huge industrial capacity. Trying to resolve an issue like this minus China is asking for trouble, because already that supply chains have been built up. The supply chains actually are very intricate, meaning they're not just simple supply chains. You can't, what I had suggested in my previous intervention, saying that you have to build redundant capacity, but that is something for the future. Right now, we are still dependent on China. Everyone's dependent on China. And I think that China is a neighbor, very powerful country. We have, even I was looking at the figures, and the first quarter of this year, China-India trade has gone up 48%. Last year also, India was India's largest. Our largest proportion of imports were from China. So there's no getting away from China. We have this border issue which we are trying to deal with. But I don't think when you're talking of economic relations, etc., that it's possible to get away from China. And I had I personally would advise the government not to do so. And I would say that we should take advantage of China's capacities, and especially when it comes to saving lives, especially when it comes to ameliorating the conditions of the people. Don't sit on a high horse. Get the stuff that you need, from whoever you can, wherever you can. That's my view.
We have
Manish, you want to take it over?
Yeah. There's a question from one of our members, PM Narayanan. He says, today it's India, tomorrow it can be another country. How important it is to have a global cooperation to fight COVID, and what's happening in that direction. I think some of it has been already answered in the previous question. I would come to another question, which would simply be, how will India come out of? And Excellency, this is to you, because I'm sure that in your diplomatic parlays, you have much of exchange between India and France on strategic cooperation and otherwise. How do you see India coming out of this harrowing experience and working now in a different manner with international partners, strategic partners such as France?
Well, I think what one of the lessons we all drew from this crisis, not only India but all of us, is that we need to be more autonomous. I mean, strategically autonomous, and that, for example, health is an area on which we should be working together. I mean, if our strategic partnership has any meaning, I mean, it's been very effective to boost our strategic autonomy in the recent years for defense, for space industry, for nuclear, civil energy. But the next frontier of this partnership now, it's really health. I mean, you said all of us have now in mind that we should keep some supply chains home, for example, for healthcare, for some drugs, some equipment. Not exactly. We should keep some of them, but we should keep the rest in friendly countries. And we in Europe, we don't have in mind just to bring back everything to Europe. It wouldn't be cost effective, it would not be possible. But we have in mind to bring as much as possible to countries we can trust. And obviously for France, India is really a great choice. I mean, there are very few countries in the world which we know that in a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades from now, we're going to be together. I mean, we share values, we share common interests, and it's been so for decades. I mean, whoever was in power in our countries, it's always been the same, because it's an assessment that we share objective values and objective interests. And that's why I guess that in the coming months and years, you will see some quite fruitful cooperations within our strategic partnership on health.
Okay, I also wanted to pose a question to Shubhajit while we wait for other questions to come in from the audience. Shubhajit, India, as you were talking about, became a good Samaritan figure last year in releasing exports of hydroxychloroquine to the US, releasing exports of PPE to other parts of the world. And India has great ambitions, as we know, under the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, to sort of sit at the table with the biggest countries in the world. How has its current predicament affected those ambitions, in your estimation?
I think, you've hit the nail on its head. India has, always tried to, especially in the last few years, has tried to portray its image as a leading power, as an emerging power, and also as what Shiv Shankar Menon, former National Security Advisor, he says in his book, as a Vishwa Guru, which is like, someone who's a global teacher. So it has undertaken a lot of these activities through soft power. But when it comes to reality, India's own capacities are extremely stretched and strained. As we right now see in the middle of this health crisis, each one of us, unlike last year, unlike in the first wave, in the second wave, almost each one of us have lost someone who we know, who we cared for, who we loved. And that, I think, is a kind of, it has, for the first time, it has hit the middle class, the urban middle class, the upper class. You see, this is the reality where hospitals are forced to tweet for oxygen support, where top bureaucrats, diplomats, diplomatic missions, they have to call out for help on Twitter. So the reality is that India's capacity is stretched, and therefore the basic definition of image is, it is a reflection of reality. So your reality, whatever it is, becomes your image. So if today that image has taken a beating because the reality is really dire, and we are in a situation where the crisis has shown the inadequacies in our capacity, that the governments have over the years have not invested in the capacity, and their systems have been completely overwhelmed by this huge numbers in which the cases are going up. And mind you, the government's own projections show that this crisis is going to worsen. It may go up to 5 lakh per day cases or 6 lakh per day cases through the month of May. So at this point of time, the government should not bother about its image, rather focus on fixing the reality, which is to go out, call out for help, accept help, increase capacities, just as the French ambassador pointed out, increase capacity of hospitals across the country, mobilize as much support as you can, so that ultimately your long-term capacity has to be increased, strengthened to exude that power, that hard power that comes with that stronger capacity. And that, unfortunately, today the reputation for competence in this country for the government has suffered massively. That is what I would put it on the table.
Thank you. Sebastian?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing now, I mean, quite an impact. I mean, it's obvious, as Shubhajit says, that the image might have changed, at least changed from a global power that sits at the G20 with all the biggest nations to someone that's facing today an existential, a crisis, at least on the health level. To the ambassador LENAIN, I mean, we know the strong ties, the strategic ties that India and France have, and President Macron in Biarritz actually say to Narendra Modi, that he wanted India and France to be the first partners in the West, in Europe. How do you see whether this crisis would actually bring to this relationship, whether a change, closing up when there is a crisis, or a reconsideration at some levels?
Well, reconsideration, not at all. Just the opposite. When you're partners, your partners in good times and your partner in bad times. And we always say in France, but I'm sure you say the same in India or anywhere else, that you can see who your friends are in rough times. And when India was having rough experiences, France was always at its side. It was true when there were some strategic decision to make nuclear tests, when there were some border issues with some neighboring countries, and each time of history. And India has reciprocated. So This crisis is no exception. I mean, we don't see any reason to change our partnership. On the contrary, and as said, I mean, this gives new impetus to cooperation in new areas such as health.
Let me come to. I'm going to combine a couple of questions that have come from the audience, but to Manoj first. Manoj, it seems that the next leg of the journey in this pandemic, this crisis, is going to be COVID-19 hitting the villages and the hinterland in India. We all know that India is not geared up. It's showing up in the big cities, but what is going to happen? What needs to be done logistically to gear up for that? And do you see anything happening? I mean, we read about it. We've seen some things even from international cooperation. There was a press release put out today how hospitals and army hospitals and trains and buses and trucks are ferrying all kinds of things. Ambassador also mentioned it, that these equipment is going to be hauled to different parts of the country. So what's your view on this? And then maybe Shubhajit from a domestic angle, reporting angle. Go ahead, Manoj. Your audio, please.
We have gone through the experience, or we are going through the experience of what's happening in Delhi, what's happening in Mumbai. So I'm not at all optimistic that once it gets down to the villages, anything will happen. I think people will die. They will not even. The government has been fudging figures. We have seen. I think the Indian Express reported in Madhya Pradesh 2,000 COVID funerals, and the government had reported 200. So you'll have large-scale fudging, but the fact is that you'll have a lot of issues because when you're talking of oxygen cylinders, you're talking of remdesivir and that other medicine, which is the unpronounceable name. The thing is, they're simply not available. There are no health centers there which can ventilators. So all this is not there. So all I'm saying is that I'm extremely pessimistic as to how this will be handled, seeing how we have handled what's happening here, meaning right now in Delhi, if some near and loved one of mine falls ill, I frankly wouldn't know what to do. Meaning I wouldn't know who to call. Meaning in Maharashtra, at least they set up control rooms where you could talk to them and they would advise you where to go. In Delhi, you don't have that. Where does one go? Meaning, where's the COVID hospital, which is the non-COVID hospital? Where do you get that oxygen cylinder, etc.? So if, as Shubhajit is saying, that things are slated to get worse, all I can say is, well, I don't know what to say, frankly.
Shubhajit, what do you think is happening logistically? Any reports?
Yeah, I mean, logistically, if this trajectory, the COVID curve, moves to the hinterland, to the rural India, I think it is, we all know, anyone who's lived in India or has traveled in India would know the health infrastructure is abysmal in major parts of these countries. And that, I think, will be a big challenge for the governments, for the state governments, for the local governments. And there would be deaths. So the only way to deal with that situation are twofold. One is increase capacity, take as much help as you have to from overseas as well as your internal resources. Mobilize your internal resources. Dr. Fauci, again, I refer to him because he said that just like in the United States, they mobilize the National Guard for vaccination, mobilize the army here to set up field hospitals in the nook and corner of the country. They can do a better job. Also organize associate the civil administration to set up more infrastructure. But India needs help. Right now, you need more remdesivir, you need more oxygen, you need more beds. And parallelly, tie up and procure as much vaccine as you can from across the world. You have to set up the cold chain infrastructure with the help of the foreign governments, companies. Take anyone's help from WHO to UN to everyone's to set it up, because only if you, because right now we have 1.4 billion people, only about 2 to 3% people have been vaccinated. That's a very small number. And if you don't vaccinate, you won't be able to fight this pandemic. So you have to tie up with as much vaccine suppliers, get as much vaccines possible, and vaccinate people at a war footing. That is the only way to, because if you vaccinate today, from 2-3 weeks from now, there would be some immunity that would kick in. 6 to 8 weeks from now, after the second dosage, there would be there will be also more immunity. So that is the only way from getting people, not sort of seeing the worst time where we have to sacrifice or we have to lose our own loved ones. So these are the only two ways that we can possibly avoid a health disaster, a catastrophe that is waiting to happen right now.
Okay, well, thank you. We're approaching 7 p.m. Indian Standard Time, so I just wanted to thank all of our panelists and just summarize a little bit about what we seem to have concluded together, which is that India is in the throes of an enormous problem that's exposed a massive undercapacity issue, particularly in its health infrastructure. And friends like France have come to the rescue and are bringing in much needed capacity, but it will be up to India in terms of how it implements it and how it receives this aid, which, as Shubhajit pointed out, does represent a change in policy, but also pointed out that this might represent a new paradigm for global cooperation in times of crises. So thank you all again. Sebastian?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone, the ambassador wanted to say something, maybe we have 1 minute to finish.
Yeah, sure. I just want to thank you. I want to thank journalists and to spare thought for all Indian and foreign journalists who are on the ground covering the pandemic and sometimes at great risk for their health and life. I know that there have been a lot of casualties of journalists doing their work, but it's a very important work. We need news. Yesterday was the World Free Press Day, and we really respect that. We really respect what you're doing. So thank you very much.
Manish, you want to conclude maybe? Thank you very much, Ambassador, for these very kind words. We really feel it.
Well, first of all, thank you. This was very knowledgeable, very enlightening in some ways, and we really wish to thank the ambassador and for taking out time. I'm sure between all these hurried trips and the entire logistics that you're doing at the mission. Also, Manoj and Shubhajit, and to my two dear colleagues, Sebastian and Emily. Clearly, as we have seen and we have known today, that there is a huge gap in capacity. But we have also seen that the world demonstrating that they can fill in that gap in capacity. And like I said, optimism is the way forward. You know, when everything else fails, we do have to be optimists, and things will happen. I just hope that it leaves us with as less damage as possible. Let's look forward to another riveting next Tuesday webinar. And those of you who can make time, please join us. We bring in very important and interesting subjects. And thank you for joining us at the Foreign Correspondents Club of South Asia. Have a great evening, and we'll see you soon again. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.